This podcast is brought to you by the Almanac and Scientific Canada. It was recorded on the traditional territories shared between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Enjoy. I feel like I just butchered that again, even though
That's close enough.
we just had the conversation. Okay.
My research on light adaptation in the fish right now.
I'm sitting in a kiddie pool, actually. It's quite nice.
Oh, that would be great.
But it's
man.
not very professional. Intro and outro game is very weak.
As is ours.
I usually forget to say anything at all, and sometimes I voice it back in afterwards. Sometimes I don't.
Right.
Sometimes it's just sort of I guess we're rolling. And then,
So I guess we're doing this. It's funny because I listen to some YouTubers that just literally don't do intros or outros. They just start talking and then they stop talking and cut it. So it's like it works. It's different for everybody, right?
I mean, when you click the YouTube link,
Yeah, you're already.
you know it's going to start.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I guess we're probably just going to go into it. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the show. This is either the Almanac or a Scientific Canada random walk episode. We'll decide later. Either way, it's going on the same feed, so it all comes down to the title. I guess you'll see what the title is when you click it. So the mystery is already ruined.
Thanks for clicking. Yes.
I'm with two very special guests. We just finished an episode. We're kind of doing a little cross episode here. Guys from the BrainBuzz Podcast, welcome.
Hey,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having us.
Hey.
Appreciate it, Adam.
Yeah.
Would you like to introduce yourselves for us? You're both at UBC and you are psych guys.
Yes.
Tell us about yourselves.
Kyle, it's all you, baby.
I know you want to start with the good voice, so
We always lead with the deep radio voice. So Kyle goes first.
yeah. I like startling people with that because I think they look at me and they don't think like, oh, like they don't get the voice out of me visually. Anyways, that's entirely aside. Hi,
That's why we
everyone.
haven't done videos up until this point, Adam. We always keep it behind.
It
Just
ruins the prestige. I don't know about yours. Like, is it a stature thing? You seem like you have a. I was gonna say a face for radio voice, but no. That
I do
comes
have.
off weird.
I have a face. I don't have a face for radio voice. I think I have a radio voice, hopefully. But hopefully I have something a little better than a face for it. But
But you're Kyle, so that was a long way
I'm
of saying
Kyle.
you're Kyle.
Kyle Gooderham. I am one of the co-hosts of BrainBuzz Podcast, and I'm a psychology researcher, PhD student at the Department of Psychology at the University of British Columbia. Couldn't decide if I was going to go with the short form or really spell it out for people there. So.
Yeah. And
And to your left, as far as I'm concerned, is
okay, I'm the left. I'm Drake. My name is Drake Levere. I'm also at UBC. Kyle and I are both hosts of BrainBuzz Podcast, and we've been doing the BrainBuzz Podcast for 3 years now. We're on our 4th season. And we talk about science and psychology, and now physics. Our first physics episode was with Adam, so we're branching out. It's well, our whole goal is, it's kind of similar to what Adam, it seems like, is doing with his work, is trying to make, science and psychology more applicable and more interesting for everybody to kind of consume. So that's our goal. And I study health and relationships and sexuality. So those are that's my research area. Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great. Thank you for coming on. This is going to be fun. So these are usually pretty free flowing. I sometimes I often like to ask about the research you guys do specifically before, getting into, either grad life or recently SciComm life. And I would really like to talk to you guys about the podcast, since it's not that often that I have other podcast people on the podcast. But maybe we can do like a very quick cursory. What is the goal of your research? What kind of research do you do? Is it with living human beings? Is it more theoretically type stuff? Yeah. Is there a lot of data? We love data.
Oh, we love data. We love our data. I guess I'll continue the trend by going first. So my research heavily focuses on understanding how health factors, health behaviors, lifestyle behaviors impact day-to-day cognitive function. And so what I mean by that is how does what we do, how does, our physical activity habits, how do our sleep habits, diet habits, how do those impact the way we think really at a broad level? So, how do we pay attention when we're, sitting in class or sitting at our work desk or, wherever that might be? How do we remember what groceries we're going to get when we go to the store? So stuff like that. I try and take a really applied approach so that my work is hopefully less theoretical and more applicable in terms of being able to assist people in their day-to-day living.
Is there like a specific cognitive task that you're most interested in, like paying attention to, lectures or, being able to do mental math or something like that? Is there like a cognitive task that you often look at?
So I'll say yes and no. And the reason being is that and something that I'm getting into right now is I kind of, unfortunately, am hoping to wrap up kind of my work, is really understanding how these objective theoretical measures that we use in a lab setting, how they really apply to our everyday world. And so if you think about like one task that I use quite frequently is called the Erickson flanker task. And so it's a classic cognitive paradigm. And what you do is you sit somebody down in front of a computer and you show them a row of arrowheads, and there will be 5 of them. And all the arrowheads will either be facing the same way, or the one in the middle will be facing the opposite direction to the other 2 on the sides. And what you have to do is, or what we ask our participants to do is, using the arrow keys on a keyboard, indicate which way that central arrow is facing. And so, it's a very good task. It's very reliable. It's consistent. We can do it over and over. People tend to score similarly. But my challenge to the industry is, when do people sit pressing arrow keys looking at an arrowhead on a computer? Like that's a very, very niche task that really doesn't happen in the real world. I think the closest you might get is like if for some reason you cared about how fast you could leave, or you hit the gas after the light turns green, is kind of the most
Right.
Applicable sense to that. So I think it's an ongoing challenge in cognitive psychology. If you're not looking to understand the really process-driven, neurofunctional level, the application of it to the real world can be where we get lost. And so that's kind of where I'm trying to bridge that gap, is looking at ways in which, hey, let's take what we know and see if we can apply it in a real world circumstance for people.
That makes a lot of sense. I, as part of my own self-edification, have volunteered for some of these psych, experiments at McMaster with some people, and
I apologize on their behalf for how boring it was. I'm sure.
Some of them are kind of fun. Some of them seem like I just couldn't wrap my head around, like, what is it that they're really trying to test? Like, what real life thing is this like?
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll like show me a video, like a 1-minute video, and then ask me like, how many times did you see an instance of water or something? And like, okay, that kind of makes sense. That's like kind of like listening to a lecture or something.
Right.
But the arrow thing, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of put it in perspective, the idea with the arrowhead thing is that we take in a lot of stimuli from the outside world, right? And so I'm sitting here, I'm looking at my computer, but I've got, my phone is in front of me, so I'm trying to ignore that, which continually beeps and buzzes at me. I've got another monitor here on my side that, things might be on. I see your dog in the background. So I'm trying, adorable, very cute. But the point is that I'm trying to maintain my attentional focus on you and our conversation. And so I'm putting aside these other visual distractors. And so, that's kind of the application of it, in that, to take it from that theoretical to the real world sense is,
Right.
The ability to shut out other information, attention grabbing stimuli that you're not trying to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I guess one of the benefits of the arrow business is that, regardless of your age or, where you are from or whatever, you know what an arrow is, or I can show you an arrow and you'll remember what that looks like. And so there should be very little, I don't want to call it cross-contamination, but, whatever you call that.
I think you're getting at this idea of a lot of cultural difference. And the nice thing about this arrowhead thing is there really isn't. One thing I have seen it's quite funny was I saw a paper looking at the same paradigm but with kids, and they found that kids just weren't engaged, and so they were kind of not paying attention to the task at all, which was a problem. So what they did was they used little like cartoon fish. And so they'd have, 5 fish, and they'd be like, which way is the middle fish facing? And that seemed to work for kids. So you can really make it culturally appropriate and available for a lot of people very easily, which is nice.
Do not envy you guys in that sense. Like once you start using fish, though, they have like faces or something like that. Like, does that affect things? Like,
oh man. Yeah,
I have
no
eyes,
idea.
Like I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I would think it would in some sense, but I mean, if you're trying to do the task in kids, like tough enough already.
Psychology is way too complicated. I don't even.
That's funny that you say that because we think the same way about physics, so that's good.
But Hooke's law, it's so simple.
Well, it is now that you've explained it to us.
And Drake, you said you do relationship type stuff.
Yeah, so my work's very different than Kyle's. I don't do specifically like laboratory work or experimental work in the sense that we don't have them coming into the lab. My work has mainly focused on sexuality and relationships. My PhD work is on how couples support each other in times of stress. So I'm looking at couples that are either dealing with chronic illnesses or in high stressed situations or periods of their lives. So an example would be couples that one partner has rheumatoid arthritis. We look at paramedic couples. We look at couples that are having their firstborn child, because that's also a very stressful time for them. So those are the kind of couples that we're looking at. We're looking at how they support each other and how they cope with stress on a daily basis with each other and how they help each other. So that's kind of what I've been doing since I've been at UBC. And then that also on the side, I've been working on sexuality research since I started. So it's kind of been focused on how there's a lot of things that I look at in sexuality, but I've been working with a lot of colleagues on sexual consent, sexual risk-taking across gender or sexual orientations between men. So we look at men who have sex with men and heterosexual men, and we look at how they differ in sexual risk-taking, how they differ in their genital self-image, and yeah, just a bunch of other things that I think are really cool. So we've done that, and then I'm looking into work on sexual desire now and sexual harassment and microaggressions. So that's kind of all of the work that I do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions that are not really related. So maybe I'll work backwards.
Love it. Let's do it. That's good.
Maybe I'll start with the first thing that you said. Actually, let's go that way instead.
Sure.
The first bit about couples supporting each other. This sounds like a very poignant area of research. Are you? So first part of the question is do you ever do like writing for magazines or things like that? Or do you know people who do that kind of thing?
Certainly. Yeah, I do know a lot of colleagues that are bloggers, a lot of sexuality bloggers. So talking about sexuality in couples, sexual desire, but not too many people that I've met at least yet, because there's a lot of support researchers and relationship researchers out there that are talking about support. But there's a lot of layers to the type of support you give, the support receiver and things like that. But it's a really cool area that I'm like hoping to explore more for sure. Yeah,
I say this because I was just wondering, I mean, COVID and all this, a lot of quarantining and is it fair to say that, having a couple living within quarantine like that is a stress type situation that would would interest you as a researcher, or
yeah, so I think it's a really good point, Adam. I think I'm laughing to myself because I think
every granting agency wants to know that right this second. Or?
there are a lot of labs right now working on what's going on with couples during COVID, and one of my lab is doing the same. Actually, they're looking at how people are managing within that. But obviously, as soon as COVID happened, as a relationship researcher, a lot of people actually know this, but when you're doing a research study on people that before COVID was a thing, those stressors are very unique. And those, so for example, I was running my study with couples that had a preschool age child. It was their first child, and looking at how they're stressed. That sample, so the sample before COVID, so before, let's say, January 2020, is a very unique population now because they are now pre-COVID. So we can't do the same study anymore because there's different stressors. And
does that ruin, like, a bunch of your data?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I actually we stopped recruiting for that study, and that's happened across a lot of labs. So I think it's kind of an interesting point that not a lot of people think about. But COVID has significantly impacted a lot of people's research programs because if you are looking at stress in couples, they are now uniquely stressed. There's a new stressor that you can't account for, or you didn't have in your study that you were thinking about, right? So you can't do that anymore. And so, I mean, my study, thankfully, we had enough couples already, but it didn't completely sewer me. But I think your point, and it's making me laugh, is because anecdotally, I mean, there's always that's what drives you to do your work is like, okay, what happened in my life that makes me want to look at this? And then for me, relationships has always been that way. I mean, I'm coming off of a breakup because of COVID. I'm not blaming COVID exclusively, but I was living with a partner during COVID, right? And it is a unique stressor.
Yeah.
It's a unique stressor. I like to consider it a pressure cooker, more or less, of like, if there's any issues or, communication issues, support issues, whatever's going on with that couple, being unable to use your other support mechanisms, so your external support outside of that romantic couple, can really, really hamper that relationship if not adapted effectively. So whenever you're in a tight space, you usually use support mechanisms and coping mechanisms like going to work out with friends or like hang out with friends, do sports, whatever. That's removed. Mm-hmm. And all you have is to stay at home and sometimes work at the same times, have to cook and like be quiet around other people's meetings and say podcast recordings, things like that. That can wear on you. And I think it's 100%. I think that there will be a lot of really cool research coming out. And my assumption is, my hypothesis, that there will be the COVID dump kind of research on, a lot of people really not benefiting from COVID from a relationship or or experiencing breakups because of it.
Right. So for these very unfortunate people that, researcher wise, I mean, whose data has been compromised. No,
you are talking to some the researcher. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
These people whose data has become so compromised.
Yes.
Is there any way for them to sort of, use this new stimulus and like try to create a new hypothesis and like rework the data a little bit, or are there ethical considerations there, like from a science standpoint of like, well, it's not fair to rework a hypothesis once you've started collecting these things, or
right?
Do you have a sense of how that would work?
That's a really good point. I mean, depends on the study and depends on how people approach it. There's a big push for a lot of researchers to do pre-registration where you have an idea and you're like, okay, this is my idea. This is what we're going to look at. But I think that there's a lot of value. There could be a lot of value for studies to swivel in that way, to be, we've got 100 or 200 couples and a lot of data from these couples, right? So we use daily diary designs or intensive longitudinal designs where we'll ask couples to independently fill out surveys 3 times a day for 2 weeks to a month, right? So we have tons of data on these people talking about, how did you get supported today? What was your stress? What were you stressed about today? How did you cope with it? All these things we're asking throughout the day so we can see changes throughout the weeks. And so if you have that data set and you have like a really good question where you're like, what was their stress level, or how are they coping with everyday stress, and then you want to say look at couples that were in COVID, you could probably do follow-ups with the same couples and see how they manage if certain things that they were doing before COVID, if those would predict how they'd manage in COVID times, right? So it's like if you're using a certain type of support that's not necessarily beneficial, or there's a incongruence, so a difference in like your perceptions of how you support your partner and how your partner thinks you support them. So like you say you support your partner a lot and your partner says, no, they don't support me very well, right? So if you have that, you could predict, like, for example, are those couples going to do worse in COVID? You could predict divorces, you could predict breakups, you could predict these things. So there's a possibility for that overlap. Unfortunately, my research project, we won't be doing that, but I think there's so much potential for labs that had a study running to do that. And I really look forward to the possibility of seeing research like that done.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. The other thing that kind of maybe that, I don't know, you reminded me of when you said a pressure cooker type situation.
I've been using the Instant Pot a lot lately.
The Instant Pot, nice. Yeah, have you been cooking a lot?
I have been. Yeah, I'm a baker now.
Oh, baker.
Yeah, it's a COVID. Like it happened due to COVID, so I'm now baking a lot more.
Yeah, got your sourdough starter going.
Yeah, no, so sourdough I couldn't do. It was too difficult, so I had to keep it simple.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sorry, I interrupted you with the pressure cooker comment.
Yeah, the pressure cooker concept reminded me of all these. I had it sort of like a NASA kick for a while, but especially like with the Mars travel and everything. They say that like a lot of the selecting for people to go to Mars or something, a lot of it's going to be based on what it's like living in a pressure cooker with these people.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think you can get some money out of NASA? Do you think they're looking to fund some psych?
I have a hard time getting money out of anybody, Adam.
Right.
But NASA would be a good partnership. I mean, I think they definitely benefit from some relationship researchers, especially because, I mean, that and, when you're talking about like sociologists too, right? Thinking about how different groups interact, different cultures, like you get sociocultural psychologists too doing that work. But yeah, relationships are, when you don't have when you've built up these coping mechanisms and these support systems and they're removed, it's going to be tough, right? And if you're not adapting and changing those to suit your needs, you'll see a lot of negative outcomes, and that's what's kind of, I feel like a lot of people are on two camps at this, and this is all like obviously not backed because the research isn't really out yet, but I'm thinking during COVID, during times of stress, during these kind of crazy times, you'll have people that are able to adapt and change the coping mechanisms that they're using. So you'll see people that are like, okay, now I'm meditating, now I'm eating right, now I'm going for more walks. That's great. Like they're adapting, they're trying to change the way that they're doing things to adapt and to sort of survive, more or less, right? And then others aren't able to do that as well, where they're keeping the same coping strategies, or they're supplementing it with more maladaptive or long-term, possibly deleterious coping strategies like overeating, drinking, smoking, whatever it is, or watching like copious amounts of Netflix, right? So it's like if you're using those mechanisms and you're not really adapting in a way that's healthy for you, you're going to see these negative outcomes, and especially within your relationship, right? Add on top of the fact that you're not coping well and you're not supporting your partner, and your partner's not coping well and they're not supporting you, and then it just becomes this Instant Pot pressure cooker situation.
Yeah. Wow.
It doesn't take a long time, just like the Instant Pot. It doesn't take long to explode, right? If it's
very efficient. Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. And I feel like this kind of leads into the second thing that I was going to mention is so technically you guys are in the same department. I don't know why I said technically. You guys are in the same department, correct?
Yeah. Psychology department. Yeah.
Yeah. So psychology, I personally don't have a large familiarity with it, but it seems like it's pretty vast in terms of like the kind of, not even just the kind of questions, but some of the stuff that we've talked about so far sounds very much like a social science type question where the other stuff seems like you could go more in like a neuroscience type direction.
Certainly. Yeah.
Could you maybe
absolutely.
say something a little bit about like is that like a hard and fast differentiation? Like for physics, hard matter, soft matter, those are like lines that you cross potentially, or like astronomy, it's like kind of the same thing. Are there like different camps within your department that are,
Yeah.
more...
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely, hard camps, or sort of the hard science versus the soft science. There's like the whole neuroscience area that does, that specifically. Within the Department of Psychology, when you kind of get into the softer side of things, there'll even still be that distinction. So there might be labs like for Drake's work, there'll be labs that are looking at understanding, some of the neural mechanisms that underlie stress and how those end up resulting in certain behaviors or outcomes.
Right. Drake said he was also looking at attraction, and I've definitely seen, pop science articles about like, we, put these electrodes on some person's head and showed them pictures of, I don't know, sexy ladies and dudes or something like that.
Yeah. They do.
Versus, relationship type stuff. That seems like it's two very different approaches.
Yeah, I think one thing to note too, Adam. I mean, we're in the same department, but we're very different. Like, there's different areas within psychology. So we have, just to name a few of them off the top of my head, I'm in health psychology. Kyle is in cognitive. There's social psychology, clinical, developmental, where they're looking at changes across development, and then you have neuroscience and neurobehavioral science. And I'm missing a couple, I imagine. Like, there's occupational psychology as well. There's tons of different other ones. But I will say there's a lot of overlap as well. So, I mean, because I'm in a health psychology lab, I look at a lot of things within couples and stress and health, but you'll still see social psychology labs looking at relationships and health and stress and things like that. Same thing with cognitive psychology. Kyle might be looking at the cognitive interactions, or other people that are in cognitive might be looking at like how the brain works under stress.
Right.
And then you obviously have behavioral neuroscience or neuroscience students and professors looking at cortisol levels in mice or rodents, and like looking at how they respond to stress, right? You have the, shocking mice to see how they react is like a typical neuroscience thing to do. So there's a lot of overlap on whatever topic you want. But the thing is, there's so many topics within the way the human brain works and how we function as humans in general. So there is overlap, but I mean, at the same time, there's a lot of collaboration across those areas. Sometimes there isn't, but it's a unique one because you can get into so many things and really never talk to some areas and not get their perspectives, or you're working with those other areas and you're thinking about those things.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess I could imagine how, two people could be studying, relationships broadly.
Yeah.
And somebody top down could be looking at if, we speak to each other in a certain way, this, we can cope in a certain way, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Or you can go from the very bottom up and like, I want to look exactly what this hormone does to this area of the brain that causes you to, be a nice person or whatever.
A good partner. Yeah, that'd be great if you could figure that out. Just,
cool.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. I think like there's a million different ways you can design a study to look at a similar concept in a different light, right? So you can look at biomarkers like cortisol levels. You can look at, you can take people's hair and look at their cortisol levels and see how stressed they are and like make connections that way. You can follow them like I do on a daily basis and see that for weeks, or you can put them in a lab and like force a tough decision or tough conversation and see how they react and look at all these other things, right? So the world is your oyster. I mean, like it's really like whatever you want to do, however you want to do it, you can do it as long as you're getting at the right operalizations of whatever you're looking at, right?
Cool.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess you need to study it at all those different levels and see how they sort of connect and everything. That's really
absolutely cool. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's maybe talk about in this sort of like broad psychology world, your podcast, you say you mostly talk to psychology people. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or
yeah. Mostly, yeah. We try not to, but I mean, it always turns out that we're like, who are we like following? Who are we looking at? And like, who are we reading usually? So it's usually comes down to like, okay, we think this is cool, and we're always kind of in that psychology mindset. So I think it's been really enjoyable to do this physics podcast with you before, which I hope your listeners come and check out because it was great. But yeah, no, we usually do that, but we're always open to cool stuff as long as it's sciencey and fun. That's all we really care for. Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, when you talk to a lot of psychology people, is it very easy to talk to people from different camps? Is there like a common language that all of you share, or do you ever find like issues where, you know, there has to be some sort of like de-jargoning, like a translation type thing? Is there ever a psychology guest that you talk to and you just like no clue at all about the thing that they study?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's definitely that case. I'll speak on this because we end up having a lot of guests on that do sort of the health, relationships, that kind of stuff. In part because, quite honestly, that research is sexy and it's fun. You know, there's only so many ways that we can talk about a flanker task before people's eyes just glaze over. My eyes glaze over. I don't even like talking.
I guess
about
their
that
ears
shit.
glaze over, right?
Yeah, their ears glaze over. Yeah.
For this very special video episode, we have some arrows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your arrowheads out. Yeah. So you know, we definitely have found ourselves kind of talking to certain groups a little bit more, but I think because we do have that basic fundamental understanding at like the most basic level, we can scaffold into other conversations that Drake and I have no experience speaking about. And so I think that actually has been a really neat experience because it's opened our eyes and ears and brains to so many other areas and fields. But one of the things that we work hard in our podcast is taking moments where some of the language is jargony or difficult to understand for whatever reason, and really breaking that down and decomposing it into its most basic elements, quite honestly, so that Drake and I can follow along as much as anybody else, right? Like, right. Everybody comes in with specific language that's common in their field, and even within the sub areas of psychology, you'll have that same problem. And so it's really about putting ourselves in a space where we can use common language to help talk about these really interesting and complex topics.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I mean, I think like we have so many different topics, like we'll go from researchers talking about like desire and makeup sex on one episode to talking about AI, which is another completely different psychology field where we're talking about, how artificial intelligence can be used and how we can compare that to the way humans think. And then, we go through like so many different types of research topics that we'll never know. That's the thing about why we started this podcast, I think, was that, you'll listen to somebody and they talk a mile a minute because they know what they're talking about, and it's so niche that you really like, unless you slow them down and say, hey, slow down, what does that mean, what does this mean, what does this mean, sometimes you just get lost. And we don't want any. I hated that, like as a younger student, when I go to a talk and someone would say like, the PSL and the CCW or whatever is going to be like going up at this rate, and it's like a linear translation. Like that shit's just awful. Yeah. You get lost immediately, and then you turn off, right? You just and that's not a fun podcast to listen to.
Yeah.
So we like in psychology, these people would know better,
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing. As researchers, what I've noticed, at least, you would think that like, okay, I'm not talking to a bunch of my colleagues here that are aware of all these niche terminologies and jargon that we use. I'm talking to a greater audience, right? I want people to understand my stuff that I'm talking about. And so it's funny because some researchers are really good at it, some aren't. And the whole point of our podcast is to be like, your work's really cool. if only you could explain it in a way that was actually like engaging and interesting, right? And all our guests are great, like
approachable.
We have no issues. They're super approachable, and they want to do this, but not all researchers do. And that's what we're trying to make more common is, just like you, is let's make this fun. Let's make it like, let's talk about it because it's really cool, but let's do it in a way that everybody can understand it, because why else would we do the work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think of the way you might talk at a conference to people who are in your very, very small sub niche.
Yes.
You're able to talk about little minutia of your research, like what makes you super special in that specific room.
Yeah.
But for like 99% of podcasts, people who are listening probably don't know anything about that room. So
yeah.
I think maybe a lot of people get sort of hung up on what makes them special within their very small subfield, which is just like really not the point.
yeah, absolutely. And I think like you can do niche things for sure. If you want to do a niche podcast on, neurodegenerative diseases, like we do know podcasts that do that, and they do a really effective job in that niche, but it's not for everybody. And the people that really want to go to those things, they can, but for us, it's like, I know this is kind of the problem within my own research and my own work, is I have too many interests, and it sounds like you were kind of the same way, Adam. Was just fuck, that sounds cool, let's do it. Like it's like, okay, yeah, sure, let's talk about that. Let's do this now. And I'm like, okay, that's how I've been pulled into all these different areas and different research topics. I'm like, yeah, this sounds awesome. Let's just do it. And so being able to talk to people and not necessarily do the work, but just talk about the research and talk about like all these different things, it's really fun. Like I really enjoy it.
That definitely scratches the itch for me, I think.
Yeah.
I think for you, I'm guessing, like I go into the lab and I can just like build something in an afternoon and test a thing. You probably have to get like 1,000 people or something to go and
yeah,
in a pressure cooker for 6 months, and then that's how you scratch your afternoon. I was wondering this on a Friday. I don't know.
Yeah.
It can be really frustrating at times because it does take a lot of time to collect the data. And so, I think psychology had a problem earlier on in its kind of history, where they were doing a lot of work with, 10 people. And you're like, it's not really a representative sample, and I don't know that I trust the conclusions that we can draw from this. And so as a consequence, and a better awareness really of sort of quantitative issues, we're realizing, hey, we need big samples. And so, for Drake to follow, even 50 couples for a week at 2 weeks, that's a huge amount of time. If, I try and collect data all the time if I can, but I still need 300 people at least typically for a single sample. So, it takes a lot of forethought before, there's a lot of steps that you have to kind of jump through. The other thing too is that for obviously great reasons, ethics boards are very careful about what we're doing with people who are joining us in lab or that we're contacting to collect data from. And so I don't know, Adam, you can correct me, but I imagine if you're going into the lab to construct something and you're going to pipette a fiber, hey, that's fine as long as nobody's going to get hurt. Like, go do it. That's great. But for most psychology researchers, it's really a case of, okay, I've got to really clearly pitch what it is that I'm going to do. I've got to, manage and mitigate any harms that might come to my participants. So there's a whole bunch of, the data collection itself takes a long time, but then all the stuff that precedes it can take, a month or more, sometimes a lot more. So.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting point. It differs on the lab too, Adam. Like we had a guest on, Dr. Zhang Zhao, like just recently on, and we're gonna have an episode out. I think it's beginning of November. She did the whole team did an amazing job, but it was a 4-year study. So it was like from the conception to the actual delivery, it was completely like, it's exhausting to think about the work that they put in and the huge team that they had to do it, to get the data. They were giving cash transfers of $7,500 to homeless individuals to see what they would do with the money and how it would help them. really cool study, but it's a huge undertaking, right? A multi-million-dollar project, and they're looking to do more with that. But it's not the same as going into the lab. Like, I need this thing for today, so I'm gonna make it, and then it's just gonna work. Like, that sounds awesome. But there are definitely labs where they can say, okay, I want to ask a specific survey question, and I'm gonna put it online on like a Mechanical Turk, which is an Amazon like survey based thing, and they'll get 1,000 participants in an hour, right? So it definitely depends on what work you're looking at, but there's some really cool work that just takes so long to do. And for example, like there's studies that are decade-long studies where they do like longitudinal studies where they'll do every 5 years or every 10 years, and those are amazing too, but not the same kind of experience for sure.
Yeah. Your 4-year study that you're describing, or not yours, but your guest's 4-year study, that's like someone's full PhD.
Absolutely.
That could be 2 master's students.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then these
more.
longitudinal studies are just like, that's your whole career.
Absolutely.
Obviously, you can do other stuff at the same time, I suppose, but
yeah, but those are huge undertakings for sure. And I think I love that study. It's a really cool episode. So if anybody's interested in it, check it out. But there's a lot of varying levels of what a research designer, what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. I feel like we talked a lot about your research and not so much about your SciComm life.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well,
we referred to the BrainBuzz a little bit, but maybe we can sort of cap off with some highlights. If listeners of mine haven't listened to you guys, certainly the study you're talking about coming out soon in November. That sounds super fascinating. I'm definitely going to be listening to that. But any like specific episodes that you want to send people to? Any ones that have been like personal favorites?
Oh. We always try and figure out what the hell our top 3 or top 5 are, and we're always shifting every week. We're like, we re-listen to them, like, oh shit, this is an amazing one. This is our best one. And then like the next week, like, this is the best one. I don't know, Kyle, do you want to do like three or four episodes that you really like, and I'll like say 3 or 4 that I really like?
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna pull up our website so that I can look through our list. Right. Just remind myself of who we had.
So we have. I mean, I appreciate you giving us this time to talk about it, Adam. Is like, it really depends what your interests are. It's a new episode on a different topic every week. So if you are interested in that topic, I highly recommend checking out. All the episodes are amazing, but I mean, I've had some the ones that I like. I always tend to send to people. And it's 100% biased because of the work that I do in relationships and sexuality. So I'll do a lot of the relationship sexuality recommendations, Kyle. How about that? And then you do the other ones, because there's a lot of really amazing ones that I really like that aren't relationship as well. Totally. One that I really liked that we had recently was Stressed Out with Dr. Alexandra Crosswell. She's an amazing researcher, and she does work that's really in line with what I do within stress research and how couples and individuals manage stress. There's some other ones. I really like casual dating, casual sex and casual dating with Dr. Jocelyn Wetland. She was my first supervisor, and I did the first big study with her on casual sex relationships. So that one was really fun. She's amazing. She's really funny. And a couple other ones. I mean, I'm going to throw the Researching Pornography with Dr. Taylor Cahuta in as well. Taylor Cahuta is amazing. He's from the University of Western. And he is a really funny episode on how he is one of the few researchers and pornography researchers in the world. Like if there's a dozen of them, he said he'd be surprised. But really cool. It's something that like always I think that's a perfect one for people that are like, oh, you do sex research. What does it look like? This is the extreme of like probably what it gets, where you're watching pornography and like, coding these things. He's doing it, whereas not everybody else is doing those kind of nitty gritty like assessments. And I also really liked post-traumatic growth and secrets with Dr. Chris Davis. I'll just throw that one in too, because I really like post-traumatic growth work, and it's a really cool concept for anybody that's interested in post-traumatic growth or post-traumatic stress in any way.
Yeah, so after a quick review, I mean, we've got over 40 episodes. I think we're
close to 50 now, yeah.
Close to 50 at least, I would think, and those are just the ones we've released. We've got a bank of other ones that, for one reason or another, haven't been published yet, or may never see the light of day. But those were a lot of fun to record. A couple of my favorites, like just again, no disrespect to anybody I don't name at all, because I love each of these equally. They're like children. I really liked a couple episodes that we did in season 3. One of them was after the psychology degree with Dr. Eric Landrum. So we talked about, what happens. First of all, how do you instruct and teach in psychology, and how do you teach in sort of any academic setting? What does that look like? How can we reshape the way that we think about education? But then we also talked specifically about the benefits of pursuing a degree in psychology. Psychology is sometimes kind of shit on for not really being, like, oh, great, you've got a psych degree, now what? And it's like, well, there's actually a lot of avenues that we can go down. So that one was great. Into the Weeds with Dr. Zach Walsh was fantastic. We talk about cannabis use. And
I see what you did there.
Yeah. It was a really cool episode on like basically looking at the legalization as well, because it was I was thinking it was on the anniversary of the Canadians' legalization of weed as well. Yeah. So we did like a cool. It was actually just happenstance, I think, that it worked out that it was on the anniversary. But it was a really fun episode to talk about how they measure it too, and how they administer weed in the experimental design. So getting people high in labs is what they did, right? So it's really cool.
Yeah, breaking down those barriers that we. People have the stigma of it. And then just 2 more really quickly. Cooperation Cancer and Conmen with Dr. Athena Actibus was fantastic. I think that
it's one of my favorites for sure.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites as well. We talk about pretty much everything, and we talk specifically about how there are these long-term impacts. It's fascinating. I can't describe everything.
I re-listened to it recently. It's really, really cool. She does like work on cooperation, how humans cooperate, and then she also looks at like how at a cellular level how our like cells cooperate with each other, and she like draws comparisons between cancerous cells and cooperation within human groups. It's really, really cool.
Oh wow! Yeah. She studied both. That's
she does the overlap and basically uses them as models for each other. It's very cool. She's really smart, really intelligent conversation. It was really fun.
And then the last one that I'll say, just for the shout out, is Digging Through the Past, it's called. And this is actually an episode that we did with my sister, who's a PhD student doing archaeology research at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver as well. So that was fun. I had a drink or two. And we had quite a good time just chatting, and it's kind of cool to get to talk with my sister about her work. So
I'll throw one more in just because I feel like we've got so many here. I'm just going through them. Man, they're all our favorites. Yeah. One that I always like going, and is a good friend of mine, is Zach Witkower's Dominance and Prestige Nonverbal Communication episode. He does some really interesting work on how the nonverbal communication. I think it was appropriate because that was the first episode we thought maybe we could do a video podcast. It was way too early in our career to do a video podcast, but it would have been an awesome one because he talks a lot about how your facial structure and the way that you posture can really evoke different emotions from other people, and you can elicit this like dominant or prestigious kind of posturing through your nonverbal behavior. It's a really cool episode for anybody who's interested.
That sounds cool. That reminds me of what is it, pickup artistry or whatever?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And we talk about like, nonverbal communication and how you can tell someone's lying and stuff like that. It's a myth. You can't really do it effectively, but that one's good. And Adventures and Memories are a really good one too. That's all.
Oh yeah. All right, I'm cutting you off. No more.
Check them out. Check out whatever you like. They're all good. I really like all the episodes, so you can tell.
Yeah, those all sounded awesome. I'm definitely gonna peruse myself.
We definitely, like we've talked about, we try and get a wide variety of guests, different interests, different topic areas, and we try and listen to what people want to hear about. So, we've reached out to researchers because we've had somebody come up and say, "Hey, I really like your show. I want to hear something about this," and so we try and take that into account. And season 4, there'll be lots of cool stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. And I can't wait to dig into your back catalog. It's gonna
Yeah,
be
I
great.
appreciate it. Yeah,
Hey,
no, I
thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
us.
Yeah,
we
thanks so
always love
much.
talking about it.
So that's it for this week. Thanks again to
We learned
Kyle
a
and
lot.
Drake from the BrainBuzz Podcast. That's brainbuzzpodcast.com. And if you like this and want to hear more, you can check out scientificcanada.ca.